Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. All right, second time's always the charm, right? My name's Keith Howgard. I'm the director for CA Technologies for the state of California. It's my pleasure to introduce Tom Perry this morning. Tom is a wealth of knowledge in Agile management, DevOps, continuous delivery. It's funny, Tom came down from Seattle and he's like, holy cow, there's a lot of rain down here in Sacramento, you know? First time I ever heard that from a person from Seattle. But Tom's got a tremendous amount of background experience in applying Agile techniques across a variety of industries. So with no further ado, I'm going to let Tom jump in and walk us through our presentation this morning. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. So hi, folks. It's great to see you here, and we're going to be talking about transformations, and we're going to be talking about two different kinds of transformations, top-down transformations and bottom-up transformations, and talking about the unique characteristics of each one. How many folks here have been through a transformation of some Agile transformation of some sort? How many top-down, where the CEO or somebody said, hey, let's do this? Okay, a few of those. How many who've done it bottom up, where it was a team somewhere that said, hey, this is a great idea, let's run with this? Okay, a few of those too. Okay, good. Good, so we have some experience in the room, and I'm hoping we can take advantage of some of that because I want to take your experience into account as well as my own. So speaking of my own experience, my first Agile project was way back in 1998. I soon afterwards started an Agile project for federal occupational health up in Seattle. And so I got a little experience with the federal domain. And then I did a big project for the state of Washington, for the Administrative Office of the Courts. So I got a little state experience in. That was a really great project. And since then, I've been very involved in the Agile community in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. And these days, what I do is transformation consulting for CA. So I get the privilege of working with a lot of very large and very interesting companies doing large-scale transformations. So I have a great deal of experience doing this over and over and over again. So that said, we're going to talk about top-down transformations first. And then we'll talk about bottom-up transformations, some of the pros and cons, and then I want to allow some time for questions because if you're anything like me, you're probably going to have a bunch. So the peanut butter and jelly metaphor was what we started with, and I don't know how we ended up there, I swear to God. I did a talk a little while back, and somebody said, well, hey, isn't Agile, how do DevOps and Agile go together? And on the spur of the moment, I said, well, it's like chicken and waffles. You know, you wouldn't think chicken and waffles go together. I had just encountered it, and you know what? Chicken and waffles is awesome. It's great, it's really good. So I make the mistake of saying this in public, and all of a sudden now I'm doing presentations on food. So it's kind of the same thing when we talk about top-down and bottom-up transformations and about continuous delivery and Agile. So we have two great tastes here, peanut butter and jelly. And so I want to talk a little bit about each. So we'll start with the peanut butter side. Totally arbitrary decision. Don't know why I started with peanut butter, but we'll run with it. So top-down transformations have a few unique characteristics when you compare them to bottom-up transformations. First, they're very process-oriented. They tend to be about safe or less or DAD or one of those big frameworks. And so we tend to start talking about the processes first in those sorts of transformations. They tend to be focused on the business needs. So when you're going in and you're talking with the executives, you're talking in a very different language than when you're talking with the teams. And oftentimes, you're reaching across multiple silos in the organization. So you're getting a very broad swath, a very big picture view of the organization as a whole, as opposed to when you are operating from the bottom up. So the processes that we talk about oftentimes when we go in are many of the popular processes that you guys are probably already very familiar with. You've got Scrum, it's probably the number one, right? Kanban, XP, not so much when you're talking to the executives. SAFe is really big these days. I see a lot of that. And other processes like LESS and DAD and Nexus and on and on and on and on. So how many folks here are using Scrum? Okay, fair number. Kanban? Any? XP? All right, so a little bit of XP. Okay, great. So when we're talking to the executives, oftentimes they're interested in what the process can do for them, or we're talking to people the next level down, who are the middle managers, who are interested in bringing out-of-control processes into line. Of course, the other thing that these conversations tend to be about is business needs. You're talking to the people who are focused on the health of the business as a whole. And so they want to talk in terms of dollars and cents and how this can improve their relationship with the customers. And so oftentimes our conversations are around things like cost savings, new revenue, innovation. Sometimes it's compliance, not my favorite conversation, honestly. Customer satisfaction, those sorts of things. So these are the kinds of things that we tend to talk about. We don't tend to, one of the traps here is that we don't tend to talk in terms of the lower level things like user stories or story points or those things. Oftentimes we're starting at a very high level. We're at 50,000 feet here. And of course we're talking across these large swaths of the organization. So the benefit here is that we get an opportunity to influence groups that otherwise might remain within their silos. So we get a chance to influence groups that otherwise we may not have any chance to talk to at all. So you've got everyone in the room when you're talking to the executives. You know, you've got, if folks are broken up into QA and dev silos, you've got those folks. Operations is there. That's a very common silo. You've got your financing people there, sales. All of those different groups are in the room oftentimes for those high-level conversations. That's great because that gives you influence, relationships, and an entry point for bringing those folks together across the organization, which can be a huge challenge. When you're trying to create an organization that's built out of cross-functional teams, exhibiting cross-functional behavior, working across the organization to deliver value, you need that perspective in order to be successful. So there are a few benefits to these top-down approaches. You get control. That's something frequently that folks at the top are interested in. How can I control this madness? You get executive support, which is not a given, all right? Sometimes when you start in the middle, you start at the bottom, you've got no executive support at all. In fact, you may not have any awareness whatsoever. You've got visibility, which is a high priority for executives. They want to be able to see what's going on. I often describe executives as some of the most ignorant people in the room. It's not that they don't want to be, they want it desperately, but they're the ones furthest away from the work oftentimes. Closest to the customer. They've got many important relationships, but to the work that's being delivered, oftentimes they're embarrassingly blind. And they want to fix that. It bothers them. And it's a great place to engage the entire organization, which is something that after a few bottom-up transformations have failed on you, you start to value very, very highly. You need to be able to build those relationships across the organization. So oftentimes what we find is even in organizations where everyone is on Agile teams, the coordination is lacking. So you can have an organization, everyone's doing Agile, everyone's doing Scrum, but oftentimes they're not coordinated and working together. And so what we want to do is provide a mechanism that creates alignment within the organization. That top-down approach is often structured to do exactly that, which can be very useful for us. The executive support is critical in terms of getting people into the room to have the conversations about what needs to be done. Without their buy-in, sometimes you can't even get FaceTime to talk about what needs to be discussed in building a transformation. So that executive support is really critical in terms of moving outside of your own silo, moving outside of your own team, moving beyond your own domain. And of course, there's the visibility. And this really comes down to building some sort of backlog structure, some sort of higher level structure that allows us to track the work that's going on. And that's one of the things that's really nice about some of these big frameworks is that's what they're designed to do. That's what frameworks like SAFe are all about, is building that structure, that kind of top-down structure where you have initiatives, and then you have features, and then within the features you have user stories, and this is all in kind of a hierarchical structure so that we can see progress at various different levels depending on where we're at. At the executive level, you're looking at your initiatives and what I care about there. At the program level, we're looking at what features we're delivering, and at the team level, we're looking at user stories. All different levels of expressing value for the organization and how we're delivering it. And of course, we're trying to engage the whole organization. How many folks have been in a transformation where there were just entire groups that just completely checked out, right? Very, very common. And that poses a big risk to our transformation, okay? When we're doing a transformation, it's best if we can get people engaged. And it's not because we're frothing at the mouth Agilist advocates, but because we need to have a dialogue so that we can work together on the same terms, using the same terminology, the same concepts, those sorts of things. It's the little stuff, okay? And without that, it makes it very, very hard to deliver. It creates barriers. Those barriers slow us down. It creates friction. The friction slows us down. So the top-down initiatives tend to have that broad perspective. That's not a guarantee. When I was at one company, I started at the VP level, but the other VPs weren't there. So oftentimes, if you're starting at kind of the VP level, it'll be just within their own organization. And you may accept that compromise. You may start there because if you can show some benefit there, then the other VPs will get on board and maybe you'll be fine, okay? Or maybe not. Maybe they're having a bad day, a bad week, a bad year, in which case you may never get them on board, okay? So engaging the whole organization is very important to us. But there are some problems. It's not all sweetness and light. It's not all unicorns and rainbows. One of the biggest issues is the legacy culture. So just like we have legacy technology in many implementations, we have legacy culture. And so culture is probably the thing that will eat any transformation for breakfast. I think there's a quote for that someplace. And basically, we have to deal with that as part of our top-down transformation. Hitting the technical debt wall. I thought for the longest time that I was the world's greatest expert at creating really fast teams that run into a brick wall at speed. All right? It doesn't do anybody any good if we do that. If we create really fast teams that are unable to deliver, okay? That doesn't help us. And missing technical practices. When you start top down, it's very easy to neglect the technical practices, to become a little bit enamored of the processes and not the practices, and end up with teams that are creating massive amounts of technical debt. When you talk about the legacy culture, you have cultures, what I'm thinking of are places where oftentimes the management culture is what I think of first, and it can be very command and control, right? And you walk in and you start talking about cross-functional, self-organizing teams, and it just doesn't translate well to these folks. And so one of your big tasks there, one of the big threats is you tell the team, you're self-organizing, you can do all your own work, and you can decide what's next, and you have this manager come wading in saying, no, 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 you do this, you do this, you do this. Or, even worse, the manager comes in and starts pulling people off the team because they have a pet project they need done, okay? So those sorts of cultural features of an organization can cause very real problems for your transformation. And so we have to address those. And top-down transformations oftentimes suffer from that. Hitting the technical debt wall. So basically, if we oftentimes see, and I challenge anyone to do this, you can get a team iterating and working in small increments and delivering value. And the first few sprints, it's like magic. Works like a charm. Things become very predictable. All of a sudden, a team that's been completely stalled out is delivering value. And you can think, oh, we're home free. However, oftentimes, if you haven't given them the technical practices, if you haven't trained them on some of those technical practices, what you're doing is starting to create technical debt. So the first couple of sprints, they're okay. A little technical debt, no big deal. But then you're going to hit a threshold. And I don't know where that threshold is. It might be at 6 sprints. It might be at 12 sprints, where all of a sudden, they're creating a mess. And that mess is slowing them down. And so rather than going faster, all of a sudden, they start going slower and slower and slower, even with your really great Agile process. Has anyone seen that happen before? Yeah, a few nodding heads. So you have to watch out for the fact that if you just walk in and give them the process is not enough. So those technical practices, what are those things? What am I talking about when I mention the technical practices? Any ideas?
I can think of the actual technology that supports like configuration management, missing, and
Technology is certainly a part of it. For instance, at one of the places that I'm currently working at, they're on mainframes, right? And they are using the technology that's available for them, the configuration management tools, the continuous delivery tools that are available for the mainframe are a significantly smaller set than what's available for you on your traditional cloud-based Windows and other Unix applications. So it's a very, very different world, and they have a much smaller tool set to work with than others who are working on more traditional environments. You mentioned continuous integration tools. Continuous integration as a practice is something that people need. It's essential for teams to be able to speed up. You need practices, testing practices like test-driven development. You need even practices between two people like pair programming. Okay, those sorts of practices also help share knowledge within the team. If you keep the specialists within the team and they're not sharing their knowledge, you'll still encounter the same bottlenecks. Okay, so a lot of these practices, without adopting these practices, we find that teams are still operating pretty much like tiny little waterfall teams. Okay, they still have people who are not sharing roles. They still have people who are operating as the expert in a given domain and not sharing that knowledge, and that keeps them slow, all right? And in many ways, the hardest part of change is when you walk in the room and ask a person to change. When you walk in and ask a team to change and say, here's your new process, we're gonna do a planning meeting, we're gonna do daily stand-ups, we're gonna do retrospectives, that's easy, that's just another meeting. I'm an expert at meetings. When you ask me to change the way I work, well, as I joke with my friends, I love it when you change. So it's very hard to ask people to do that. And yet, that's the fundamental change that we need to have happen if you're really going to see meaningful change take place, if you want to see meaningful acceleration take place. So those are the sorts of things I'm talking about. So that's top-down transformation. Any questions about top-down before I move on to the bottom-up?